The Prix Galien is a welcome initiative to stimulate creative research and promote excellence. Barack Obama. The Galien Awards ceremony is considered the equivalent of the Oscars night for the innovators in the labs and awards every year the best pharmaceutical product, the best biotechnology product, the best medical technology, and the best digital health product.
This is the right event, on the right issue, at the right time.
I thank His Excellency, the President, for bringing Prix Galien to Africa, and I look forward to the day when we will celebrate an African winner of the Prix Galien.
I'm particularly grateful to receive this award.
The awards are among the highest honors in science and commerce because they lead to improvement in the human condition.
The Prix Galien Awards recognize the world's brightest minds and most innovative companies. They are a true celebration of the hard work required to produce life-changing interventions.
That is what makes us optimistic about the future.
Congratulations to all of you.
Make a difference. Join the Galien Foundation. And now, welcome to the Galien Digital Health Webinar Series.
Hello, and welcome to this very special session from the Galien Foundation. My name is Jessica Federer, and I will be leading you through the next hour. I'm the Managing Director at Huma, a health technology company in research and care, and was previously the Chief Digital Officer at Bayer, leading the digital transformation across the enterprise. I'm very pleased to have you all here with us today as we go through a topic that is very close to the mission of the Galien Foundation, which has a 50-year history of fostering and recognizing scientific innovation that improves lives around the world. So today we are in for a treat with a very rich discussion on the role that technology played in enabling this rapid vaccine development. I would now like to welcome our esteemed panelists representing global manufacturers. We have a wonderful group with us today, and I'd like to introduce the panelists, invite them to introduce themselves in alphabetical order by last name. So we'll start with Dr. Raquel Beria.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. Raquel Beria, I head up the medical team in biopharmaceuticals at AstraZeneca. I'm thrilled to be here with such esteemed panel of experts and with all of you on this very timely and impactful topic.
Thank you, Raquel. Dr. Helio Lagavrand.
Thank you, Jessica, and good day, everybody. Thank you for having me. I am Marie-Pierre Helio, and I head clinical development and operations in global product development at Pfizer.
Thank you. Terry?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Terry Murphy. I'm the Vice President of Enabling Business Information Solutions in Global Development at Janssen R&D. That's the pharmaceutical sector of Johnson & Johnson.
Thank you, Terry. Shri? Shri, would you like to introduce yourself?
Shri, you're on mute.
Yeah, hello. Hi, my name is Shri Vatsan. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for IQVIA Technologies. I manage and drive our digitization portfolio for the CRO, as well as launch digital products in the market. I'm super excited to be here.
Thank you, Shri. And Dr. Zaks.
Good day, everybody. I'm Tal Zaks. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Moderna.
Great, welcome. All right, let's dive into the conversation here. The first question we have is really straightforward. What is the role that digital technologies played in the development and the clinical trials and the production of the COVID-19 vaccines at your companies? Marie-Pierre, we'll start with you.
Thank you. So I think digital played an immense role in speeding up the clinical development of the COVID vaccine. At Pfizer, with our partners at BioNTech, we developed our vaccines in just 266 days from the announcement of the pandemic to the first emergency use authorization. And that is remarkably fast compared to usual development of a vaccine. That was only possible really because we had access to digital technologies. One of our biggest challenge was really to manage the massive amount of information in a very short time frame. And just to give a few numbers, we enrolled 44,000 participants in about 4 months at 150 sites in 6 countries. So digital really enabled us to manage the sheer volume of data in real time, from acquisition to reporting, and all the while maintaining quality. A few numbers again, because I think it really helps understanding what we were managing. We received more than 500,000 electronic diaries from participants, 7.5 million data management records, and nearly 34 million total data points. So the volume and the speed at which we were working was totally unprecedented. So what we decided to do was to create operational dashboards that provided real-time data visibility into the study conduct and the data quality so that we could drive faster, informed decision-making. And these dashboards leveraged Pfizer Insights platform, which is a data lake that enables real-time access to all of the global solutions that are used in the clinical trial process, such as randomization tools, electronic data capture, and other sources. And it enabled us to pool key data, metrics, and insights across all of the functions of the clinical trials. So for example, site startup, enrollment, diversity, data entry, and data cleaning. And what we did is that we built one highly customized dashboard that went into very specific detail and was updated every 4 hours so that we could see in real time what was happening across the trial, and we could adjust our operational strategies as necessary. So we could see very quickly if we had to apply a new strategy to enrollment or to diversity, or whether we saw that some sites had some difficulty in entering the data in real time, and we could provide additional resources. And it really enabled us to manage our operations internally throughout the day so that there was never any time lost. We created also a series of functional dashboards that deep dived into very specific aspects of the trial. So just an example, we had quality metrics and oversight dashboards, data management, data cleaning, and we even had a dashboard to track nasal swabs from the time a sample was collected to the time we had the results of the PCR.
Wow. Dashboards updated every 4 hours in a global pharmaceutical company. That's an incredible change in operations and how an organization works. Terry, would you like to share some from your side at Janssen?
Sure. Maybe starting in the development side, from candidate identification to, well, final selection, we move very quickly. So in a period of about 3 months, we moved to selecting a candidate, and we used extensive simulation software to look at ways really to increase yields and also assess the benefits of different molecular scaffolds, aiding the development process. Our candidate selection was condensed into a very short period of time. And again, we immediately commenced the process development and scaling operations to produce at scale and support the trials, as well as obviously getting ready to fulfill emergency use authorization demands. So that was very, very novel in the sense of the simulation software in the development side of the business. Similar to Marie-Pierre, in the clinical trial space, we utilized a new integrated digital health suite. So we have similar numbers. We're greater than 45,000 patients recruited in our phase 3 study. And actually just one data point that's interesting, in one day alone, we recruited just over 3,000 patients, which is unprecedented. We haven't seen that in the past, really. But we used a new integrated digital health suite in partnership with our colleagues from IQVIA, and Shri is on the call here today representing that capability. But we use that to identify, recruit, and manage patients in our trials. That allowed us to move much more quickly and also manage the large patient volumes in terms of data but generated over a very short period of time. The digital suite covered consent, randomization diaries, biometric collection, as well as used for patient engagement. And we used our company standard electronic data capture technology in addition to all of our integrated back-end data management and statistical programming capabilities to ensure that we had high data quality and obviously near real-time flow as well. So you hear a very similar vein. We were looking at our data in very, very close to real time from the digital health suite as well as from our own back-end. And digital really was central to our capabilities to cover, adverse events, sample collection, testing, and really ensure the completeness of the data package to support database lock and our recent application for emergency use authorization. I will say in one other area, we utilize data science models to predict where the COVID-19 outbreaks would occur. So if you remember back in August, we were starting to say, okay, where is COVID going to be? Because it was tailing off at the time. Obviously, we're in a very different situation now with variants and with pretty significant outbreak globally, but we use data science to predict, and that helped us in our country and site selection process for our large phase 3 trial, and we got it right from 2 points. I guess the data science helped us to go there, and then we saw the events during the trial as well. So digital has played a significant role.
Yeah, enrolling 3,000 patients in one day. That's incredible. Tal, talk to us about what you used at Moderna.
Yeah, so it's really a fundamental topic for us. Our company is really digital is the backbone of Moderna, the way we think about it, and really starts with our science. If you think about what an mRNA molecule is, it's an information molecule. And, all of our drugs are basically different information, different sequences that lead to different applications. And in the case of COVID, that's what enabled us within 48 hours of the sequence being available on the web to start production, because this was all enabled by the digital infrastructure to begin with. It goes through manufacturing. Our manufacturing infrastructure from the get-go has been built from the ground up with no paper, all digital technologies, and continuous use of tools to improve manufacturing and yields. When you think about the sequence, choosing an mRNA to go to make a protein, evolution has chosen one sequence, but the number of possible sequences are greater than you could ever experimentally address, more than atoms in the sand on our beaches. And how do you do that? And that's where we leverage routinely, have been for years, machine learning and artificial intelligence to do better than what evolution would come up with, so that when we put a sequence into production, we're assured of the yield and of the ability to translate it. And I think as I then look at the application in the real world, certainly things that have been mentioned before, like understanding where the pandemic is intended to go so that we can direct the clinical trial recruitment, real-time monitoring of patient characteristics to ensure we have diversity in the trial. But for me, what had underlied that ability is really the tremendous collaboration and tools that technology has enabled that 5-10 years ago would probably be really challenging. It is now relatively straightforward to connect data pipes, if you will, at the source, and enable different companies to be looking at the same data simultaneously. And for us as a small biotechnology company that is highly leveraging CRO partners, that was really a key enabler and continues to do so. So where we lack the infrastructure, technology has enabled us to tap into the infrastructure of our CRO partners to achieve what we have.
Well, Tal, that's the 48 hours from sequencing being available on the web to production is just so historic. But you gave the perfect segue into our wonderful CRO partners. So Shri, can you talk to us? We've heard a little bit about some of the work that IQVIA has done here. Can you share with us what role the digital technologies played at IQVIA in enabling some of these studies?
Thank you. And we're humbled and honored to be supporting several sponsors through the vaccine trials. And I break up the clinical trial process into different stages. The first one, of course, is using digital technology to recruit the right sites and patients. And as many of my colleagues have talked about here, that requires a large amount of data, but also AI and machine learning to really help you identify what is the right patients, where are they coming from, how do you anticipate and recruit, especially at such large volumes. each of the sponsors were recruiting over 40 to 45,000 people in the trial. And so you need to make sure that you're taking care of those types of dynamics as the market is evolving. The second part of it is, now that you've identified the patient, it's actually to get them into the trial and into the site. And that by no means is, it's quite difficult to make sure that they attack the right sites, they know where they're going, and bringing the patient into the door is a pretty important one. And digital technology played a significant role in bringing that into the door. But once you come in, it's all the things which you do with digital technologies, all the way from consenting to randomization, to supporting it from connected devices and diaries, and the large volumes of these, in millions of diary entries and millions of patients coming in and using technology every day. And then the back end part of it, as the data comes in, how do you then have the dashboards and the dynamics of knowing what's going on, and the data surveillance to make sure that when and where you need to intervene. Because many a time, certain sites may have different behaviors where you need to go and help and support them, whether it's a recruiting issue or it's a data management issue or it's a collaboration issue. So quickly identifying and getting there is pretty important. And last but not the least is all the technology around adverse event reporting, because we're really trying to roll things out so quickly, but safety is paramount in our industry, and therefore really looking at adverse events and how you can be proactive about it are all critical areas of how technology was applied to make these trials work in an expeditious manner.
Thank you, Sri. I think all of you have underlined how critical technology was to meet these timelines and to enable these parallel work streams, and to be the assist in the speed that we were able to achieve. The second question we have for all the panelists is about the specific technologies that were most helpful in accelerating these phases and collapsing the development timelines. And you've touched on some of them, but I'll go to Raquel first.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Jess. Indeed, technology helped us deliver the data with unprecedented speed. One thing to highlight is that we did not cut any corners by doing so. And if we reflect, and my colleagues gave great examples already, but there's at least 4 elements that were essential to accomplish this. First, in the way we chase the virus with interactive heat maps to have a global picture of the affected areas, the speed and the direction of the COVID-19 infection spreading. We at AstraZeneca did it in collaboration with IQVIA, with the governments, with the universities, as well as with our own predictive analytic modeling. And so this, of course, allowed us to quickly open clinical sites in areas where we could have the maximum impact. And so there was an immediate efficiency in the speed of enrollment and of course, in the diversity of the volunteers that were engaged. Second, we operated after what I called patient centricity 2.0. So we used electronic consent forms, electronic diaries, implemented a system whereby patients were given wearable devices that would continuously stream vitals, such as oxygen saturation, heart rate, body temperature, and other more sophisticated measures, and made ample use of telehealth, thereby limiting the study visits and increasing the efficiency of the study. So more volunteers could actually take time and participate in the study. And so again, enrolling faster. Third, we improved the connectivity really 24/7 to enable us, all our scientists, to stay efficiently connected with each other, with the many collaborators that we have all around the globe, and to their labs, so that they could, for example, run a mass spectrometry analysis remotely, which is, it was unheard of before, only a few years ago. The fourth element is that we ran systems in parallel instead of sequentially, which is the essence of design thinking. So as all the previous elements that I just described to you were happening, our manufacturing facilities were starting to ramp up at risk. And so instead of waiting for the trial results, they started to mass produce and assemble every element that is needed, from the vial stopper to the patient leaflet. Also, at the same time, we work on our web structure for the case intake using automation and artificial intelligence so that every keyword could be analyzed for patterns and really allow a fast routing to the appropriate channel. And so this is how we could have a day zero launch with all system ready at the time of regulatory approval, with such magnitude that, as Mary Pierre was saying, it was unheard of before. Now, there is a fifth element that helped creating this unprecedented speed, which is less on the technology side, but nonetheless absolutely critical. And it's the so-called rolling regulatory review process, so that the data was provided on an ongoing basis as it became available, really done with the intention of speeding the review process during such emergency. So this is how the timelines were accelerated without compromising in any way in our commitment to safety and really strict ethical standards.
Thank you, Raquel. And for our participants who are joining us today that aren't familiar with the typical drug development timelines, when you talk about how you did it sequentially, can you also say a few words about how it's normally done so people can see where that time save is coming from?
Absolutely. So it all starts in R&D. I think Terry is the one that described it the best, thinking about the best candidate. So once R&D is done with selecting the right molecule, then there's all the studies from phase 1 to 2 to 3. Then there's the regulatory submission, all the discussions with the regulatory, and only at such point, really, there's the manufacturing facilities that start the production, and really all the supply chain kicks in for the final product to be delivered to patients. And so instead of going from A to B to C, etc., we went all in parallel. That's the major difference, risking really, but during this unprecedented times, really that's the decision that was the right one to take.
No, thank you for clarifying. I think it's helpful when people see the speed. It's helpful for them to know what happened was that everything still happened the same way, but in parallel at the same time instead of one at a time. And that explains the time savings that we were able to achieve. Shri, can you share some more about the technologies that shorten the timelines?
Absolutely. As several of us talked here, artificial intelligence and machine learning was a critical part in the early part, both in patient recruitment, identification, and sites, as well as Raquel talked about in the adverse events and looking at keywords and keyword searches, so that we could really complement the human thinking around these things with technology to really accelerate quite a bit of the effort which is needed to be done. The second area of digital technologies was the whole continuum of patient engagement. And we've seen that has really exploded quite a bit, and having digital technologies across that patient engagement continuum helped all of us collect data in a much more proactive manner. But it's also the flip. When data was not coming, with data surveillance, like what Mary Pierre and others talked about with dashboards, one was able to react quickly to what needs to be done. So the gentle push and pull mechanism was working, and that was enabled quite significantly with digital technology. And these two, I would say, in combination has really helped us engage more specifically in the marketplace on where you need to intervene and what you need to do. And I think that's the power of digital, the ability to know what needs to be done and then to be able to quickly react to what needs to be done.
Absolutely. Terry, can you share with us some more of what you were doing at Janssen for these timelines?
Sure. I guess, as already said, we did utilize an integrated digital health suite. And I guess that has been tremendous, really, in terms of, as Shri said, getting the real-time access and identifying where we have any gaps or not. But that's probably one of the big significant ones. I don't have any more to build on what Shri has already.
That's great. So we have these great efficiencies that we're seeing. Let's talk a little bit more about the technologies that worked really well, and maybe also the ones that didn't, and have a transparent discussion there as we're sharing. Terry, you you were talking about how you've reduced the timelines, you've improved patient continuity, you're getting data quality at speed. Maybe do you want to share some more about what technologies didn't work so well?
Yeah, I guess what like just to maybe talk about what worked well first. I mean, we obviously put significant strain on the platforms that we had, given the amount of data coming at the speed it was coming at, and you know, the required quality. I think what the part that we underestimated and didn't work very well was the investigator and training needs on new technology. So we put an awful lot of effort into getting the technology into the hands of the patients in trial, getting it to sites. There was significant lift needed at sites to help our sites come up to speed with what is essentially a platform that had both a web-based and mobile capability embedded in it. Now, again, not being critical of the technology in any way, but I think there's a kind of a barrier to adoption that we had to come over. We have done that. We learned a significant amount, and actually we're, you know, right now we're running our 3009 study, which is the 2-dose study, and we're taking all of the learnings from that into that. So we've learned along the way, but it's been a challenge to essentially recreate how we've executed clinical trials and run at speed and at scale with tech. So the tech hasn't really necessarily been the barrier. It's been the learning curve that we've had to bring our sites and investigators and staff on board. And the other thing I would say is that the other significant thing that worked well was the digital health suite. Really helped us in terms of the diversity recruitment. So we were watching the diversity numbers in very near real time, and we actually throttled recruitment in certain areas. And in order to, when we met our quotas in certain areas, we then drove after kind of some of the more diverse populations to ensure that we were meeting or exceeding expectations on that, which we've done. So it was really, really good to be able to see that in near real time, because in a typical trial, you know, you talked about the typical sequence, which is more of a series. In a typical trial, you're looking really post-trial or post-phase, you're looking to see how well did we do. We were actually looking right during the trial to see how well are we doing, are we meeting our requirements, and can we actually change things now in order to meet requirements, which we did. So that was really good, and that worked very well. I know you've asked me what did not work well. I couldn't really point to technology that didn't work well. It was really the hurdle for folks to embrace the tech.
Yeah, the learning is always something that takes some time. You called that out as something that was harder to expedite. Did you manage to find any tricks? Did you find anything really effective that helped to expedite the learning of the staff or of the teams in using new technology?
We deployed, in partnership with IQVIA, we deployed virtual study coordinators at the sites who were trained up on the tech, and they helped significantly to bring folks up to speed with the new mobile devices, help with the back office. In addition, we had significant help desk support, and Shri can talk to the volumes of calls that were going through the help desk. We had significant numbers, but again, it was about having the answers quickly and being able to diagnose and triage, issues very, very fast at site. So we placed folks at the sites to perform a role that in the past we wouldn't have had. So we would never have somebody that was the tech coordinator at a site, for example. You have your CRAs, you have folks at the site that are looking more at the execution of the trial. But that was something we did. We've learned from it. I think it worked really, really well. We've closed a database, which is obviously under review right now, but we're very happy with the content of that and with the quality of it.
If I could add to that a point, Jessica, I think
yes,
one of the fascinating learnings for us has been that the adaptation to some of these technologies, and I'm talking now about remote monitoring of sites, I mean, some of it was just real life. People couldn't get in or people were getting sick at the sites. And it's hard to overestimate. We use all the predictive analytic technology to make sure the study is launched in places where people are going to get sick. Well, people did get sick, but that included the site staff and the monitors. And so reacting to that and figuring out ways in which to digitalize and do some of the work remotely, including trial operations, I think that is in the back end going to allow for quality improvements and efficiencies over time, and those gains should be with us for the long run. The second point is, like my colleagues, we had from the get-go, through our strong partnership with PPD, put in place the ability to look at real-time metrics from the diversity and the patient characteristics. We translated that into actually more transparency to the public. We were the first ones out there. There was a tremendous pressure to understand how these trials were performing and ensure that indeed we were recruiting the right populations in terms of diversity, minority, people at risk for disease, not just infection, and being able to provide the public a weekly snapshot because we had the data with that kind of frequency and immediacy, I think was tremendously reassuring to the public and a very strong stepping stone, if you will, to building trust in what it is that we're doing. So the immediacy of the data and that enables a level of transparency, and I think that transparency then becomes critical to building trust with our key stakeholders.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to chime in on the transparency and trust discussion? I'm sure that's something what Raquel and Marie-Pierre, you want to add to?
Yes. Well, we hope it was a little bit clarified when we spoke about the fact that we acted in parallel and the studies really ran fast. And so there was a good reason for that. And we did not cut any corners. So that that should help in terms of transparency and trust in the pharmaceutical industry. I was personally actually thrilled to see that the science was in the headlines. And for the first time in many years, the pharmaceutical industry was part of the solution and not, in fact, the problem, if you will. I don't know what the others think.
I guess it's just a comment I'd make on a more general basis. It's amazing how the world has become so educated on clinical trials over the last year. You go to family gatherings, you meet friends, and everybody's I don't want to say an expert, but everybody knows what happens. They know about phase 1, phase 2. How are you? How's your data looking? I think that in a way has helped, and I think people globally have come on the journey of clinical trials with us as we've all tried to cure this terrible pandemic, and I think it certainly has led to building trust. And from a data sharing perspective, we obviously have a big data sharing program at J&J and Janssen. We will share all our data back for academic research, etc. And you know, I think it's important that we do that and we open up the transparency discussion. But it's actually quite it's exciting to have been part of this journey, and it's exciting that the globe is rooting for us in the main. And that people are very understanding now of what it takes to actually go from finding a problem and finding a cure and getting it into the arms. I see some of the questions and answers. People are asking why it takes so long to get it into the arms. You know, it's a very, very complex supply chain problem to go from development to manufacturing to actually supply and distribution. And certainly there's nobody dragging their heels on this, but very exciting.
Yeah, and the transparency is, the transparency relationship with the public is really just getting started, because the post-emergency use commitments are going to be asking many of us and many of you participants in the public, when you get a vaccine, to be part of studies, to continue to follow these emergency use authorizations, and continue to share data and continue to be part of this ongoing research in these post-approval commitment studies. Shri, can you share with us also what you saw and what worked well and perhaps even what didn't from your side?
No, that's a good question. And as a chief digital officer, I would say technology worked, but actually technology had to be complemented with humans, as Terry was talking about. You know, whether it's AI, ML, or whether it's digital technologies, you do need that last mile touch and doing it. And one of the things we realized in the scale up is how do you bring the human and technologies together, complementing each other, so that we can make sure that this delivers the promise what it's designed for. So that was one big lesson we learned. And second is, as you start to scale at this volume, you know, we're in a regulated environment. And of course, with patients and consumerism, people are very used to what we call a B2C model, Amazon or Google or others, or Facebook. And so working in tech within a regulated environment is also one where you have to go and educate and saying what you can do and what you cannot do and how you can do it. But making it easy was a critical component of the positives, but also making sure that we're doing that in a very regulated and secure environment was a critical component. So it's digital with human, enabling both in a complementary manner, and making sure that as we're doing this fast, we're doing it in a very regulated environment so that we can make sure that what we're collecting is appropriate for submissions.
Thank you, Sri. So talking now about just the data, we've been talking about the technology. Now let's go a little bit deeper on the data that's collected by that technology. How for those participants on the call that aren't from the pharmaceutical industry, can you also share a little bit about how the data itself is used, the data that all this technology is gathering and empowering? How is that data helping us to overcome risk and address risk and ensure the safety and the speed in parallel? Sri, would you like to start?
Yeah, there's several aspects of technology which was used, especially data standpoint, right? We talked about really using data upfront in recruitment and understanding where target population. That required massive amounts of real world data to figure out what is going on, as well as appropriate feedback around data and data sets. And then as we start to continue in building the data surveillance, there was a massive set of data coming in almost on a daily basis around patient engagement, patient behavior in the trials, which had to be constantly looked at. And that was real-time data coming in. And then as we go into the adverse effect models right now, both post-marketed, but also during the trial, we've been collecting massive amounts of data around this. So I would say that fundamentally, these trials have both leveraged data to recruit and do things better, but also are the beginnings of collecting all this complex set of data to make sure patient engagement as well as safety is taken care of. So I just wanted to say that this has been almost fundamental, that the digital created the data platform, which then can now be used and leveraged for really better understanding of what's going on with all the vaccine trials.
Raquel, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so multiple challenges really that we encounter were overcome with data. So one COVID-related challenge was actually making sure that all the other clinical trials would not be stopped, for example, that we had running, and that the supply of our medicines for patients would not get disrupted in any way. And so the way we use data and technology was through a system that we have. It's called Control Tower, and really we have a fully automated visual analytics of all our studies all around the world. And so we predict recruitment, as well as we're able to amend the studies when needed. And so we were largely really able to keep them running. And also we were using our own databases to establish which areas were critically affected by COVID and make sure that the supply of medicines, some of them, in fact, are life-saving drugs, would not be disruptive. Another challenge that we faced was with the electronic patient diaries, and the fact that especially the less tech-savvy people, let's remember about a quarter of them were over 65-year-old, would not necessarily respond to the super techie reminders. So we implemented an extra level of care to enforce their response. But also, as Sri was mentioning, we actually added at times the human touch to really complement the technology when needed. But I have to say, the upside of having so much technology embedded in our trials is that we have an increased real-time digital monitoring, as you were mentioning, Jess, of the post-approval safety and effectiveness of our vaccines, which is absolutely unprecedented.
Yeah, if I could add to that. So we talk about the tremendous data richness that we had during the trials, and I think you've seen examples of all the companies converging really on modern tools. And I think all of us struggling with the same elements of the more tools you deploy, it's actually easier to deploy a tool than to teach somebody how to use a new tool. And so that quickly shifts to being the bottleneck. And as was mentioned, you know, the more fancy the tools, actually now you have to contend with a diversity of people, some of whom will find it easier to use a tool than others. So using an electronic diary versus a paper diary, sure, the electronic is easier for us, but for many people around the world, actually putting X's on a piece of paper is easier than finding the app on their iPhone. The real challenge, though, I think is the one that we're facing now and to come, which is the massive amounts of data. And Sri alluded to that. And we're working with his team when looking at safety. So in our trial, we had about 30,000 participants analyzed deeply, you know, in the context of a clinical trial with a lot of investment on every individual to make sure we get the data right. Well, as of this morning, there's been, you know, almost 27 million people just in the United States dosed with our vaccine. We were approved, what, less than 3 months ago. That's already a 1,000-fold increase in deployment. The number of people dosed with Pfizer's vaccine is similar. It's just above 28 million. That's just in the US. And so we have to adapt how we're looking at information now to make sure that we understand signal to noise and that our data capture systems are actually up to par. And it's really become interesting because we're doing it in a world where everybody is tech enabled and connected in a way that was never that way before, right? So we have to understand how to analyze our signals when the funnel for finding signals is suddenly much larger, much more furious, much more intense, and much more connected through social media than it ever has been before. And I think these are some of the challenges that lie ahead of us, where we actually have to catch up with our technology and our frameworks for looking and analyzing the data to where the public already is ahead of us in this regard.
Yeah, Tal, you said that well. We have to catch up with our technology. That's something that we hear from so many pharmaceutical companies and manufacturers, that we're using new technology, but we're retrofitting our old processes, and we're trying to do the same things we've always done using new tech. And that clash is creating a complexity, and it's not shortening the timelines, and it's causing barriers. And the challenge for us as an industry is try to do new things with the new tech instead of the same old ways we've always done it. And maybe, can you say a little bit of what you recommend to organizations who are looking at just a much broader signal to noise ratio than they've ever seen before?
Well, when there's a lot of signal, then people talk about artificial intelligence. Frankly, I still struggle with the non-artificial bit of it. And I think as we intake these massive amounts of data, I think we will learn how to better process it. And I think some of the emerging tools of natural language understanding, et cetera, we're looking at ways in which to leverage them. But I think these are still early days because we still need a significant investment in the non-artificial intelligence to shape those tools and help guide them to where we need them to be. Now, that being said, one of the phenomenal I think truism of our day and age in this domain is the acceleration of pace. So what looks like a lot of work and a long time, I actually expect that with the right amount of investment up front, and we certainly at Moderna are now very actively engaged in looking at this, we should be able to improve our tools and use modern technology in that way to accelerate our learnings compared to what we've done in the past.
Look forward to seeing more of that. Marie-Pierre, can you share with us a little bit of how you're approaching the data challenge, the speed and the scope of the data at Pfizer? You mentioned, internally, you've set up whole new processes and dashboards refreshed every 4 hours, which is incredible for a global pharma company, but also how you're looking at that increased amount of noise for those signals that are so important to find.
I echo everything that was said before by my colleagues. I think one aspect that we really leveraged was the use of real-world data to accelerate the development of our clinical trials in this environment. And as Terry and others were saying earlier, one of the key questions we wanted to answer was, where would be COVID-19 when we would start our clinical trials and conduct the study? So we used some of the dashboard that we had created in the spring when the pandemic really hit Europe and the US, and we were following the global spread of the virus to really understand how it affected activities at sites in our clinical trials globally. And we were using various sources of information, including the confirmed cases, the mortality rates, hospitalizations, and the use of ICUs at not only at the country level, but also in the US at the county level. And we were also tracking information like travel bans or government restrictions, or whether institutions and sites allowed patients visits or recruitment, or even on-site monitoring. And so when we started our planning for our phase 2/3 clinical trial for the vaccine program, we leveraged all of this information, which was updated daily up to weekly, and we overlaid it with additional information that included population density, socioeconomic scores, diversity scores, and even in the summertime, civil unrest. And we use a combination of actual attack rates that were reported and also epidemiology modeling, right, predictive analytics, to look at the forecast within the next 6 weeks of how the attack rates would be changing in the US and the other countries that where we were conducting our study. And all of this information was used at the beginning of the trial to really select the countries and the sites where we wanted to conduct this trial, but also during the recruitment period to decide whether we needed to slow enrollment in some region and boost the enrollment in other regions. So a lot of information that is available from very different sources, internal and external, and then putting all of this and analyzing it as quickly as possible to make fast decision making.
Oh, thank you.
Just to build on what Marie-Pierre said.
Yes.
You know, we've used mobility data, which is actually, you know, from your mobile phone, whether you be on Google or Apple, to look at traffic patterns and look at when people were moving around and where they're moving around. We could predict areas that were moving into lockdown or otherwise. So it's actually very interesting to start looking at data that you talk about. Everybody is connected today. You know, that data is available out there, albeit anonymized, but very, very helpful for us in terms of understanding, you know, being able to look at the case of Melbourne. When Melbourne went into lockdown, we were able to look at that, model it, and say, okay, well, there's how the mobility moved, and here, if we see it again in other areas, that we could predict the same. So there's some very interesting data that you can now start to triangulate into this space. Now, obviously, it's for a pandemic. I don't think we're going to be worried about patient movement in the future, but it's caused us to think in very different ways around data and data that's available to us to try and help solve problems around where we're going to see people and find patients.
Yeah, when we looked at where the pandemic was going, we actually looked at two algorithms in parallel. One was by the private industry. One was actually a government NIH sponsored, and so we were constantly monitoring both, and the places where they overlap, we said, "Yep, that's where we go."
So let's go to a question about how do we keep these innovations. So what lessons, you know, everything you're sharing is historic and groundbreaking, and is the best example of how technology can expedite research and expedite life-saving vaccines. How can we take these lessons, and what do you think will stay with us? What lessons are you taking away from this experience for the future of biomedical innovation? Marie-Pierre, let's start with you.
Well, so to begin with, I think we commend the FDA, EMA, and other regulatory agencies for really developing emergency guidance that enables us as sponsors to conduct our trials during the pandemic. And for example, we use remote monitoring extensively when travel was restricted and monitors could not visit sites, and also to go faster on for on-demand monitoring to meet accelerated timelines and ensure oversight of patient safety. And recently, EMA has released an updated guidance that actually expands the scope of remote access of source data review and verification. And it's really a positive step forward for our ability to effectively manage trials remotely. Now, a policy priority should be to update permanent regulatory framework to support and standardize digital innovation so that we can apply all the lessons learned from those COVID-19 trials to other therapeutic areas, and also globally through harmonization initiatives. It was amazing, the interactions with the regulators. They were dramatically accelerated. The review of the protocols, the scientific advice, they occurred almost in real time, and the virtual meetings with the regulators really enabled rapid decision-making. And I think that we need to move beyond COVID-19 and think about every other therapeutic area, and in particular life-threatening diseases, where we need to be able to collaborate with regulators in a similar manner. And we talked earlier about rolling submissions. So that's what we did to various health authorities. But a great improvement really would be for regulators to review the same data in parallel to avoid submissions to different health authorities, right? So in fact, if simultaneous collaborative reviews by multiple regulators, they would not only bring breakthrough to patients faster, but it would also help regulators in decision-making by learning from each other. So I really think that fully embracing digital technology is absolutely critical to access, speed, and quality. And we saw amazing benefits through our trials. And there is no reason that we should not be able to use this experience to catalyze changes in clinical development, including in the regulatory space. And if we could have a more fit-for-purpose approach that serves patients better.
I think your call for simultaneous collaborative review by regulators is something we all will take away from this call. Raquel.
So the big lesson for me, again, going on the same theme, was that when we're all motivated and form a united front, governments, regulators, pharma industry, academia, we can accomplish amazing results. And I think Nelson Mandela said it best: it seems impossible until it gets done, and really we got it done. It's a testament of the value of genuine collaboration. Another reflection for me is that we get lots of pushback when we want to disrupt the status quo. For example, we talked for years about online product labels or bringing the point of care to patients' homes, and nothing changed. And you know, the silver lining of this pandemic is that COVID-19 was the biggest disruptor and accelerator of all times that really forced us to look at alternative, smarter ways to work out an issue. And I think we're at a point of no return. And once we see how efficiently we used some of these elements, we will probably keep it. And then maybe the last point, somebody mentioned that, is how do we imagine the world post-COVID-19? And it's something that at AstraZeneca we're really passionate about. And in fact, we were one of the first entities to sign the United Nations Global Compact Statement, which is truly urging all the governments around the world to align their COVID economic recovery efforts with the latest climate science. Because ultimately what we want to do is to operate in such a way that recognizes the connection between the business growth, the needs of people and society, and the limitations of our planet. So that will be our next big challenge.
That is indeed a global challenge for all of us. Terry.
Yeah, I guess just on a broader sense, just outside of the COVID trial, I've been leading the clinical relaunch for Janssen and looking at all of the other trials that we're trying to progress through the pipeline as well. And I think, you know, the fact that we've gone to direct IP shipments, so we're shipping drug direct to patients' homes, that we've deployed home health nursing that's been mentioned already, you know, care to the home. Telemedicine is now fully embraced at this point, whether it be, at the sites themselves using their own technology, or whether it's sponsor provided. I don't think any of that is going to go backwards. That's there to stay, and it should be. It would be great to see things like electronic consent embraced globally. I think things like GDPR, not getting into political discussions here, but GDPR can be a barrier to progress, and we see a lot of resistance in the EU in particular to electronic consent, whereas the US is certainly embracing it and a bit more progressive in that side. So it'd be good to see movement there. And I maybe would say something that, just one point is that the higher cause really, such as the global pandemic, has meant that we've really, in J&J certainly, we've challenged our conservative approach to risk and engaged in a really good discussion to disrupt really firmly held beliefs in terms of how we've executed in the past and to allow us to go faster. But it's really important to note that our J&J colleagues, our partners, the regulators, the governments have worked tirelessly, really, around the clock globally through days, nights, weekends to deliver this vaccine. So I think it's not really realistic that we can shrink the time of drug development and delivery to 1 year for all trials. That's not realistic, because I don't see any company being in business if you're going to manufacture at risk based on a phase 1, because it just that's not going to happen. I'm talking about manufacturing at scale. Now, obviously, we manufacture for our clinical trials. There is a process to follow. Certainly, we've learned a lot, and I think there's a lot of things we can be doing in parallel. If we certainly got more engagement from the regulatory authorities on rolling submission and on parallel submissions, that would be very exciting. Could reduce the time to market for drugs globally. But there's a lot of learnings here. I think we have a motto of no going back, and our hope is that we don't go back in areas that we've taken significant steps forward. But certainly our teams do need a breather. The teams that have been working on the vaccine have been flat out for over a year. I'm sure it's the same in Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna, and we're now looking at how do we refresh those teams, give them a break, and get them back to some semblance of normality. But normality will not be the same as it was before COVID, and that's exciting.
No, that's such a good point, Terry, that all of your organizations have really been on the front lines fighting a war in the trenches, and that's taken their nights and their weekends and their holidays and their time from their family. And it's been a tremendous collaborative sacrifice that the industry has been able to meet these timelines. Shri, can you share with us some of the lessons to take away as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We're all in a new norm, but what I wanted to say is change is here to stay. And if you really look at digital technologies and adoption, it's all about change and change management. And I think that is now front and center. There's a change going on with regulators, as we know. There's a change going on in internal processes on how we are using it. And to your point, changing those processes, not adapting technology to an old process, but going into the new one. And more with all my colleagues talked about with the data and insights coming in, how do we rapidly use that to be much more targeted and specific? So we are in a new norm, but one of the biggest impediments and these success factors is change. How do we adapt to change and adopt change is going to be most critical to see how we're going to survive in the new norm. So really exciting times, and but it's not about technology, it's about change and how do we manage change. So that's the key takeaway for me with all of this trials and acceleration around the trials.
Thank you. Tal?
And Jessica, I think the most important technology that we fail to mention is the fact that we're so productive because we all work remote. So tele anything has been acceptable. We're all here in a VTC. I'm able to join a wonderful panel in Europe, and I'll still make it home to lunch with an almost zero carbon footprint and no jet lag. And I think it's made all of us a lot more productive, and I'm sure that there are very strong elements of that will be here for the long run.
Thank you. So we're getting some really robust comments from the audience, many of them thanking and congratulating you and your teams on the work that's been done, noting the amount of evolution and organizational change that needed to happen inside your companies to make this happen, and the big steps forward that delivered. We're also getting questions about how tech will continue to drive delivery and care of these vaccines, that last mile, and how it will be able to enable a continued focus on diversity and inclusion. Could you say a few more words about how we focus mostly on how technology has been used in development and speed and change? Let's just spend a minute now before we get to the end of our time together on technology that is used closer to the point of care for the patient.
I think that's a challenging one for us to envision, given that most of what we do in our industry is so centralized. We're thinking about ways in the distant future, maybe not so distant future, where actually distributed manufacturing will get products better. We certainly have applications that are fully personalized. We're working on a personalized cancer vaccine that would be very much tailored to each individual patient. But I don't think we as an industry in our collective mindset are quite there in terms of the distribution models, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And I maybe I just add, the distribution model in this case is a very different model than normal. And obviously, look, we deliver right now to distribution centers. And the governmental agencies will actually handle the distribution from there. And I'm not saying anything about, they obviously have challenges in terms of making sure that gets rolled out, but we're not engaged in that. So our typical model is to deliver to, the pharmacies, to the hospitals, to wherever. But in this circumstance, we're actually selling large volumes of vaccine to governmental agencies, delivering to distribution centers, and the further distribution is from there. I think the question really is better posed towards the governmental agencies than ourselves right now. So I'm not trying to dodge the question, but it's certainly not something, we're not responsible for that right now.
Well, and I think that's a question then we'll take up in the next session of this series hosted by the Foundation. So we'll go to one other question that's coming in from the audience that I want to cover, is a little more personal. What has it meant to each of you to be part of this remarkable experience in your career? If you could say a few words about what that's meant to you professionally or personally, to be part of seeing the technology available today actually be used to deliver such value right now.
So let me start. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So no, I wanted to start on the personal side. I actually lost a relative due to COVID, and I know many families that have been devastated by it. So I'm extremely proud to be part of this effort to bring hope and healing to so many. As a clinical scientist, it reminds me every day of the simple truth that we are never done learning, and we have to follow the science and really keep up with the innovation, catching up with the data. That was a good quote from one of my colleagues. Professionally, I think it's been the biggest adrenaline rush to lead a world-class medical team during this time and seeing really the accelerated evolution of healthcare right before my eyes. And, when they say that a good leader has to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations, well, I think this was the ultimate test for that. Going back to what you were mentioning, Jessica, of course, the work is not over, because truly the value of the vaccine is realized only after it's been injected. And so to me, ensuring a broad and equitable distribution and really building trust and partnerships with the underserved communities will be the next critical frontier for us. And maybe, the message for me would be, it's great to have all this technology, but nothing substitutes, in this case, the human touch to really change the beliefs and the behaviors.
I'm happy to go next, Jessica, because I think we all have a version of that. For me personally, it's a tremendous sense of privilege and humility to have been played a part in this, coupled with as immense a sense of responsibility, given what we know our technology can enable, and now bringing it to bear to actually have an impact. And vaccine development is usually impersonal because you never know who's going to benefit. Well, in this case, this is personal. This cuts close to home. I've seen my mom who's 80 get a vaccine, an mRNA vaccine. I've seen my daughter-in-law who's a physician in the front lines in New York City get vaccinated. So this one really cut home. And I'd say the last piece is just the opportunity it's given me to meet and collaborate so productively with so many people. And I'm not just talking about, the people in the company, but the NIH, government officials, regulators, investigators, people just out there in the world who ping us routinely to ask questions or tell us about their experiences. It's just been a tremendous sense of privilege to be part of it.
And I know we're probably short on time, but I'll just echo, the level of collaboration that I've seen across industry. I've seen us share, put the IP aside, share all of the insights, what we're seeing, share, trends, share, all of the stuff that can help us not only get the COVID vaccine run, but also help the ongoing clinical trials. And it really has been immense. And I hope that continues really. For myself personally, I have been affected from a family perspective, but very excited to be part of contributing towards this greater good.
Thank you, Terry. Shri?
Yeah, as digital officer, you could be in many different industries, but more humbled and privileged to be here and supporting such an effort. As all my colleagues said, this is unprecedented times, and being part of the solution rather than part of the problem is a great feeling, and more to be done, as everybody said, and a long way to go, but really humbled to be a part of that journey. So.
Thank you. Marie-Pierre?
Yeah, I agree. It's been incredibly inspiring journey, a deeply satisfying experience to make a difference in people's lives, to be part of a breakthrough during this pandemic, and also very humbling to think how work every day could save so many lives, and to see people being able to return to work, kids to go to schools, families to reunite, and to bring some normalcy back to the world. So this is a development story that has no parallel in history. We really, it took 9 months really to bring a solution to the world, and it will have a global impact, not just on public health, but economic recovery and also social connectivity. And I couldn't be more proud of all of the people who really rose to the challenge and who worked at the speed of science. I really like what Terry was saying about how flat out the teams are and how much we need to refresh them. They rose to the challenge. They work at the speed of science to deliver this vaccine to match the needs of society. And when the world needed science the most, people really stepped up. So it was really inspiring.
Thank you all. And with that, we have reached our time for today's session. So I would really like to thank all of our panelists and the organizations that you represent for the immense effort that you've put into responding to this horrible unwanted catalyst that, we none of us wanted this to happen. And the way our organizations and our world had to respond in using technology to achieve the impossible has been amazing. And the fact that you are all here today sharing your learnings and what worked and didn't work, this is also part of that continued collaboration that is going to make us all stronger moving forward. So thank you to all of you panelists, to everyone who's joined us for this hour, of course, to our translators and to Bruno Cohen and the Galien Foundation. A recording of this session will be made available, and of course, we look forward to welcoming you at a future Galien session. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you for your participation. And please note, the next Galien Forum and Galien Awards ceremony to be held on October 28 in New York City. Looking forward to welcoming you to celebrate the Golden Jubilee of Prix Galien.